Imagine you're standing in the center of a city, and it is under absolute total siege.
Just complete chaos.
Right, complete chaos. The local economy has basically just evaporated overnight. People are starving in the streets, disease is running unchecked, and just outside the ancient stone walls, this massive, ruthless enemy army is physically occupying your family's ancestral farmland.
Like it's completely overrun.
Totally overrun. And in the middle of this terrifying, deafening chaos, someone walks up to you and says, hey, I need to offload that farmland. Do you want to buy it?
Yeah, and not just buy it, but I'm going to need your hard-earned, highly liquid silver for it right now, today.
Exactly. I mean, it sounds completely insane, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the textbook definition of a fundamentally distressed asset. The land is completely alienated, you can't access it, and it's practically worthless to anyone who is just, trying to survive the current week.
Right. It sounds like the absolute worst financial investment in human history. You would look at the seller like they were hallucinating. But, and this is where it gets crazy, what if making that exact, seemingly suicidal financial investment is actually the ultimate demonstration of trust in God's providence?
That's the core question.
Yeah. And what if this isn't just some obscure historical footnote, but the precise economic and legal blueprint required to rebuild a massive modern-day nation right now?
It really is.
Welcome to a brand new deep dive on reformed thinking. Today, we are exploring how a staggering modern geopolitical and economic crisis, specifically the explosive contamination of Ukraine, is perfectly answered by an ancient biblical blueprint found in the book of Jeremiah.
And we're really looking at a fascinating interception of disciplines today. We're pulling data from these highly detailed secular economic policy papers focused on the monumental task of demining Ukraine, and we're pairing that data with profound theological exposition of Jeremiah chapter 32.
Right, the Jeremiah text is so rich here.
It is. It explores how God commands economic action in the face of total, devastating war.
So the mission for this deep dive is to bridge that gap for you. We want to show you how physical restoration, something as gritty and terrifying and dangerous as, digging high-explosive anti-tank mines out of the freezing mud, demands absolute legal integrity, generational patience, and an unshakable trust in God's sovereign providence.
Which is not exactly how secular economics usually frames it.
No, not at all. So we need to start by grasping the sheer mind-boggling scale of what is actually happening in Eastern Europe right now, because we're talking about a geographical crisis that defies the imagination.
We really are. I mean, the official estimates coming out of the recovery conferences for late 2025 and early 2026, they classify as much as 138,500 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory as potentially affected by mines and explosive remnants of war.
Wait, hold on. 138,000.
Yeah.
And 500.
I mean, what does that even look like? Put that abstract number into perspective for us. Okay, so to put it in perspective, we're talking about a physical area larger than the entire country of England.
Oh, wow. Larger than England.
Yes. It is a massive continent-altering portion of the nation's geography that is suddenly locked away behind an invisible wall of lethality.
And the economic cost attached to that geography is just as difficult to comprehend. The World Bank and partner organizations, they conduct these massive audits, like the fifth Rapid Damage and Needs Assessment, and the numbers they calculate make your head spin.
They're astronomical.
Right. They estimate $195 billion in direct physical damage. But the total recovery price tag over 10 years, that is projected at $588 billion.
The billion, with a B.
Yeah, $588 billion. That is a colossal financial mountain. And to understand why that number is so high, we have to look at a concept the economists call the contamination tax.
Right, and the contamination tax is, it's perhaps the most crucial economic mechanism to understand in a post-conflict zone.
Break that down for us. What does that actually mean on the ground?
What it means, practically speaking, is that you do not need a confirmed, mapped-out minefield to paralyze a regional economy.
You just need the fear of one.
Exactly. The mere suspicion of explosive hazards acts as a massive compounding tax on every single level of human activity. I mean, think about it. If a farmer suspects that even one single corner of a massive 500-hectare wheat field might have an unexploded artillery shell buried in the topsoil.
Just one shell.
Just one. That entire 500-hectare field goes unplanted. The heavy machinery stays in the shed.
Because no one wants to risk driving a combine harvester over an anti-tank mine.
Right. And so the seed is never bought. The seasoned workers are never hired. The whole supply chain freezes.
So think of this contamination tax like a hidden lethal mortgage lien on a piece of real estate. Like if you own a commercial property, but there's a massive unresolved legal lien on the title, the entire system freezes.
Yeah, the underwriters run for the hills.
Exactly. And no underwriter will write an insurance policy for it, which means no bank will issue a construction loan against it, which means no builder will break ground on it. The uncertainty creates a total freeze.
And in Ukraine, the physical equivalent of that legal lien is the unexploded ordnance.
Right. A local municipality won't send a crew to fix a ruptured water main if they think the trench is booby-trapped with a butterfly mine.
A displaced family won't drive their sedan back to their home village if the main highway is suspect.
And every single one of those individually rational, self-preserving decisions to stay away, they just compound into this national macroeconomic freeze.
But bringing this into a theological framework fundamentally changes how we view that freeze. Because when you look at the theological consensus surrounding the physical earth, war, and the lethal contamination of the soil with explosives, they're seen as direct physical manifestations of human depravity.
Yeah, total depravity on display.
Exactly. It's a violent, intentional disruption of the created order. But under the creation mandate, going all the way back to Genesis 1.28, human civil society has a divine baseline duty to steward the land, to preserve human life, and to make the earth fruitful. The land is meant for life, not death.
Which totally flips the script on how the international community often treats demining.
Yeah.
Because usually demining is viewed as a nice secondary humanitarian project.
Yeah, it's the charity work.
Right. It's the charity work you get around to after the peace treaties are signed, the borders are drawn, and the serious macroeconomic ministers have fixed the central banks.
But the policy papers and the theological texts actually align perfectly here in rejecting that view, though obviously they use very different vocabularies.
How so?
Well, they both say demining is not an afterthought. It is the absolute foundational prerequisite for economic and civil resurrection. I mean, you cannot implement a functioning monetary policy, you cannot stimulate a labor market if the physical ground your citizens walk on is designed to amputate their limbs. Clearing the land is the literal first step of obedience to the mandate to preserve life and cultivate the earth.
Okay, I have to jump in and push back here on behalf of the secular economists who might be listening, because we just established that the recovery price tag is $588 billion, and we have 138,500 square kilometers of suspected hazard area.
All right, huge numbers.
Right. So a perfectly rational, market-driven financial analyst might look at that risk-to-reward ratio and say, you know what? Cut your losses.
Just walk away.
Exactly. The capital expenditure to clear this mud is too high, and the return on investment will take decades. The rational move is to abandon the heavily contaminated zones, redraw the agricultural map, and move the capital to safer regions. You're asking modern governments to act on a mandate of total restoration, but the math just screams fatalism.
And that is a highly rational, entirely secular calculation.
Yeah.
But to understand why it fails, we actually have to travel back in time. We need to go back to the year 587 BC.
Okay, let's do it.
To a geopolitical situation that looked equally impossible, equally fatalistic, and entirely financially ruinous, just to see how that exact mindset was confronted.
587 BC, that's the siege of Jerusalem. Paint the picture for us. What is happening on the ground?
So we're in the final agonizing days of the southern kingdom of Judah. It is the 10th year of the reign of King Zedekiah. And outside the limestone walls of Jerusalem sits the most unstoppable military machine of the ancient world.
The Babylonian Empire.
Yes, led by King Nebuchadnezzar II.
Mm.
And they have laid absolute siege to the city. They've built siege ramps, they've cut off the water supply, and isolated the capital completely. The historical and biblical records tell us that famine is raging. The societal structures are breaking down.
The economy has ceased to exist.
Completely ceased.
But Zedekiah brought this on himself, didn't he? I mean, it was a massive geopolitical miscalculation.
Oh, a massive one. Zedekiah had rebelled against Babylonian supremacy, largely relying on a misplaced trust in an Egyptian military alliance. He was specifically banking on Pharaoh Hophra to ride to the rescue. It was political pragmatism overriding covenantal fidelity. And, well, the Egyptian army never showed up to break the siege.
So the city is starving, the king is panicking. And where is the prophet Jeremiah during this collapse? You'd think he'd be out in the streets trying to boost morale.
Far from it. Jeremiah's have been locked up in the court of the guard within the royal palace compound.
So he's in prison.
Yeah, Zedekiah threw him in prison for preaching what sounded like treason, I mean, Jeremiah had been declaring for years that Jerusalem was absolutely going to fall to Babylon, that Zedekiah's political pragmatism was a catastrophic failure, and that the people needed to submit to God's judgment.
So Jeremiah is literally sitting in a royal prison in a starving city, listening to the Babylonian battering rams hit the walls. It is the definition of a hopeless situation.
Really is. And right at that moment of peak hopelessness, his cousin Hannibal walks into the prison courtyard with a business proposition.
As you do.
Right. Hannibal owns a field in Anathoth, and he offers to sell this ancestral land to Jeremiah for cold, hard silver.
Okay, let's talk about Anathoth, because the geography is the punchline here. Where exactly is this field?
Anathoth is a Levitical territory located roughly 3 miles northeast of Jerusalem.
3 miles northeast, which means it is completely outside the city walls.
Oh, it is fully overrun. The Babylonian army is literally camped on it.
Wow.
The siege logistics, the supply trains, the encampments, the foraging parties, they're operating directly on top of Hanamel's property.
So this is what I meant about the secular economic calculation earlier. If I am a Judean guard watching this transaction go down in the prison courtyard, I'm thinking Jeremiah has suffered a total psychological break.
Oh, absolutely.
Because it is literally like asking a foreign direct investor today to wire millions of dollars to buy a heavily mined frontline wheat field in Ukraine's Kherson Oblast, right where the artillery craters are still smoking, while the investor is currently locked in a basement in Kyiv.
Yeah, why on earth would God command his prophet to throw away his highly valuable, highly liquid silver on a field he cannot even walk on? Well, the psychological state of the Judeans witnessing this is the entire point. The theological commentators note that the population was entirely consumed by defeatist fatalism. They believed the nation of Judah was permanently finished.
Game over.
Right, game over. They believed their ancestral land was lost forever to a foreign superpower, and any economic investment in the future was meaningless. And from a purely secular, present tense perspective, they were 100% right.
Because buying that land was financial madness.
Yes.
So the purchase is a deliberate shock to the system.
God commanded Jeremiah to make this purchase specifically to devastate that secular despair. It was a prophetic, highly visible physical action designed to confront the false political pragmatism of King Zedekiah on one hand and the fatalism of the general public on the other.
Showing them who is really in charge.
Exactly. God was proving that his sovereign decree, not the Babylonian military machine, ultimately determines who owns, inherits, and farms the land. But crucially, and this is key, this wasn't just some abstract piece of performance art. It was the exercise of a profound covenantal duty.
Right.
And the mechanics of that duty perfectly mirror the exact agricultural recovery strategies that the economic policy papers say are required for Ukraine today.
The agricultural connection here is so profound. Let's look at the soil itself. Ukraine is famous for its Chernozem, right? This incredibly fertile black soil. It has a uniquely high percentage of humus, phosphoric acids, and ammonia.
It's beautiful soil.
It is quite literally some of the most productive dirt on planet Earth, and it feeds hundreds of millions of people globally. But the contamination crisis has fundamentally broken that global supply chain.
The agricultural statistics from the recovery assessments are just grim. I mean, heading into 2025, Ukraine's cultivated area had dropped by 23.5%.
Nearly a quarter of the land.
Yes. And the Food and Agriculture Organization conducted nationwide surveys showing that 18% of all crop enterprises reported physical land contamination. But when you zoom in on the frontline regions, that number jumps to 38%.
That is massive.
And in places like the Kherson Oblast, which you mentioned earlier, the combination of high explosives, the destruction of irrigation infrastructure, and the resulting drought led to an agricultural output collapse exceeding 98%.
A 98% collapse. You are watching an entire regional economy built over generations just evaporate.
Oof, gone.
But the Ukrainian government isn't just throwing up its hands like the Judeans in 587 BC. The policy papers outline a massive state-backed compensation program.
Right, because the Ministry of Economy realized that the cut-your-losses approach you mentioned earlier would result in the permanent death of the agricultural sector. The average farmer simply cannot afford the astronomical cost of hiring private, specialized demining firms to clear hundreds of hectares.
It would bankrupt them instantly.
So the state created a mechanism to cover 100% of eligible demining costs for farmers. They process this funding through the State Agrarian Register, and the actual contracting is done through a very transparent public procurement system called Prozoro.
Yeah, Prozoro.
And the government allocated 1 billion hryvnias just to kickstart this specific mechanism.
Wait, explain how Prozoro works mechanically, because dumping 1 billion hryvnias into a war-torn agricultural sector sounds like a recipe for massive corruption if it's just handed out by local bureaucrats.
Oh, absolutely. But Prozoro is actually a brilliant piece of e-governance. It operates on a reverse auction model.
Reverse auction.
Yeah. So instead of the government just picking a contractor behind closed doors, the demining job is posted publicly on the digital platform. Certified demining operators then bid down the price they're willing to accept to clear that specific field.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, everything is open source. Anyone can audit the bids, and it forces a competitive, market-driven price for the clearance work while eliminating the traditional bribes and kickbacks.
So the state is stepping in, using transparent technology to act as the financial redeemer of the land, ensuring the farmer doesn't lose their ancestral livelihood. And this brings us right back to Jeremiah 32, because that concept of redemption is the exact legal mechanism happening in the prison courtyard.
Right.
Let's dig into the Mishpat HaGolah.
Okay, so the Mishpat HaGolah translates directly to the right of redemption. When Hanamel comes to Jeremiah, he isn't just making a casual real estate pitch. He is invoking a highly specific, ancient Israelite property law detailed in Leviticus 25.
Which is fascinating.
It is. Under the Mosaic law, if an Israelite was facing total financial ruin, which Hanamel was, given that his land was a Babylonian parking lot and he was forced to sell his family land to survive, his nearest kin, known as the Goel, or kinsman redeemer, had the legal covenantal duty to buy it.
Because, in the ancient Israelite mind, land was not a liquid asset. It wasn't something you just flipped on the open market to the highest bidder.
Exactly. In the biblical worldview, the land ultimately belongs to God. The Israelites were tenant stewards, granted the land as an inheritance. The Mishpat HaGolah was a socioeconomic safety net designed to keep the land within the family tribe.
To protect it.
Yeah, to prevent it from being permanently alienated, consolidated by wealthy elites, or falling into foreign hands. Jeremiah, acting as the Goel, was legally stepping up to redeem the land from permanent loss.
And the theological commentary makes this incredible argument that modern demining is the physical, gritty manifestation of the Mishpat HaGolah.
It is a stunning analogy, isn't it? Unexploded ordnance, landmines, tripwires, these are the physical weapons of an enemy designed to permanently alienate the land.
Yeah.
They are designed to physically strip the property owner of their inheritance by making it lethal to inhabit. Demining is the painstaking, highly technical, incredibly costly act of redeeming that physical soil from contamination so you'd be restored to its rightful steward and passed down to future generations.
But the economic policy paper makes a crucial point about the mechanics of how this redemption has to happen in the real world. You can't just send a guy with a metal detector out to clear one random hectare of dirt and call the job done.
Oh, well.
The paper insists on organizing agricultural demining around what they call geographic production clusters. Why is that distinction so important?
Because it addresses the physical reality of how farming actually works. A farmer's field might be meticulously cleared of mines, checked with ground-penetrating radar, and certified completely safe.
About to go.
But if the 2-kilometer dirt access road to get the combine harvester to that field is still mined, the field is useless.
Right.
If the local irrigation canal was blown up and is full of debris, or if the regional power grid needed to run the grain silos is offline, that perfectly safe field remains completely economically dead.
It's an ecosystem.
Yes. The policy mandates that recovery cannot be piecemeal. You have to treat the farm as a holistic production ecosystem. You have to clear the fields alongside the drainage ditches, the access routes, the rail spurs, and the storage facilities simultaneously.
I want to introduce a point of friction here, looking at both the ancient and the modern scenarios. Because Hanamel was just one guy, right? He was a single individual facing total financial ruin because of a geopolitical disaster he had zero control over.
True.
Today, if you look at the Ukrainian agricultural sector, you have massive multinational agribusiness conglomerates operating there.
Oh, yeah. Huge players.
Right. And those conglomerates have armies of lawyers, sophisticated risk analysts, and huge capital reserves. They can afford to hire private demining firms to clear their massive mega farms. But what about the modern-day Hanamel?
The little guy.
What about the smallholder farmer whose entire generational wealth is tied up in one 50-hectare contaminated plot? If we rely on a purely market-driven approach, doesn't the little guy just get swallowed up by the conglomerates who buy his land for pennies on the dollar?
That is a highly perceptive critique, and it's a critical vulnerability that the economic policy paper addresses directly. Because you're right, if you leave demining entirely to a free market auction-driven system, the large agribusinesses with massive, easily documented parcels of land will absolutely get cleared first.
Because they're the safest bet.
Exactly. They offer the best economy of scale for the demining operators. The small farmers would be completely abandoned, forced into bankruptcy, and bought out.
Which would be a total failure of the covenantal duty of redemption we just talked about. It would be the exact consolidation of land that Leviticus 25 was designed to prevent.
Precisely. Which is why the state policy mandates intervention. Local governments are required to aggregate small, contiguous plots into larger, single clearance zones to make them attractive to operators.
So they bundle them.
Yes. Furthermore, the state provides legal assistance to help small owners establish their titles and boundaries, which are often lost or disputed after a war.
Yeah.
And most importantly, the policy demands the creation of special, subsidized support windows, specifically for women-led households and returning veterans.
That's fantastic.
The state is ensuring that the redemption of the land prioritizes the most vulnerable stewards, not just the most capitalized corporations.
But here is the tragic reality. Even if you redeem the field, even if the black soil is perfectly cleared, the irrigation is running, and the tractor can get down the access road, a restored field is totally useless if there's no one left to farm it.
Yeah, you need people.
You need the human beings. And that brings us to the restoration of the family unit, the housing crisis, and the sheer scale of human displacement.
The displacement numbers are arguably the most staggering part of the data. The Rapid Damage Assessment estimates that 14% of Ukraine's entire housing stock has been damaged or outright destroyed. We are talking about over 3 million households displaced.
3 million households. Not just individual people, but entire family units. That represents entire communities, neighborhoods, and civil networks scattered across Europe or living as internally displaced persons.
It's just devastating.
The government is trying to manage this, right? I mean, the policy papers mention something called the e-recovery system and the HOPE project. How do those actually function mechanically for a refugee?
So the e-recovery system is another incredible use of digital infrastructure, operated through a state web portal and smartphone app called DIA.
Okay, Dia.
Imagine a citizen who fled Kharkiv and is currently living in Warsaw. Through the DIA app on their phone, they can legally document the damage to their property back home, submit the evidence, and apply for state compensation without ever having to navigate a physical bureaucracy in a war zone.
Wow, that's incredibly efficient.
It is. By mid-2025, this system, backed by the World Bank's Hope Hero project, had successfully processed grants allowing nearly 100,000 households to purchase materials for self-repair, things like roofing, windows, and structural fixes.
That is amazing technology, but again, we run face first into the physical reality of the explosives. You can't just wire someone a digital grant, tell them to go to the hardware store and fix their roof if their front porch is wired with a tripwire.
Right, you just can't.
And this connects so beautifully back to the theological mandate. What does the Lord actually say to Jeremiah after the silver is weighed and the purchase is complete?
Okay, so in Jeremiah 32.15, after the entire legal transaction is finalized, the Lord issues a sovereign prophetic decree through Jeremiah. He says, houses and fields and vineyards shall again be bought in this land. And the specific Hebrew terms used are Badam, Sedot, and Keramim.
Houses, fields, and vineyards. It's highly specific.
It is, and what's fascinating is how those three words encapsulate the divine intent for human civil society.
Oh, unpack that.
Well, God's ultimate vision for post-war recovery is not perpetual refugee camps. It is not endless, militarized buffer zones. His vision is stable, multi-generational family life, represented by the houses of the Badam. It is abundant, staple food production, represented by the fields Seto.
And the vineyards.
It is vibrant, long-term commerce and joy, represented by the vineyards Keramim. Because vineyards take years of patient cultivation before they yield a harvest. You don't plant a vineyard if you plan on fleeing next month.
Right. It's a holistic vision of human flourishing. It's not just survival, it's civilization.
Yes. And the secular economic paper argues for this exact same holistic approach, using the language of urban planning. They argue that you cannot just demine an isolated house, fix the roof, and tell the family to move back. You have to clear what the planners call the network of daily life.
The network of daily life. That phrase really stuck with me. It perfectly captures the frustration of these displaced families. I was thinking about it like this. Imagine being handed the keys to your newly renovated house.
Okay.
The paint is fresh, the roof is patched, but then the authorities tell you that your front lawn and your driveway are covered in invisible bear traps. And by the way, The road to the local grocery store might have a pressure plate on it, and the playground at your kid's school hasn't been swept yet. It's not really a home, is it? It's just a freshly painted prison that you happen to own.
That's a brutal way to put it, but it's completely accurate.
So how in the world do local governments manage the expectations of millions of traumatized people who just desperately want to go home, but the invisible bear traps are everywhere?
It requires an immense amount of political courage and absolute transparency. The economic policy paper is very firm on this point. Governments must establish and publicly broadcast realistic recovery tiers.
So managing expectations.
Yes, they cannot give in to the massive political temptation to promise immediate widespread return everywhere just to score points in the next election cycle or to project strength.
Because false promises in a mined environment literally get civilians killed.
Exactly. The government has to be brutally honest with its citizens. They need a public, easily accessible classification system. Tier 1 represents areas that are verified safe and ready for immediate repair and return.
Okay, green light.
Tier 2 represents areas that require technical survey, meaning we suspect there are mines, but we need teams to map it.
Yellow light.
Tier 3 requires major active clearance operations. And Tier 4 remains absolutely unsafe for civilian return for the foreseeable future.
Red light.
This level of transparency prevents premature, highly dangerous civilian movement. It allows families to make informed, rational decisions about their future, whether that means signing a 2-year lease in a different city, retraining for a new job, or selling their property rights.
So transparency is the only way to keep people physically safe. But if we are going to rebuild these networks of daily life on a national scale, we aren't just talking about micro grants for roof repairs. We are talking about billions and billions of dollars in private institutional capital.
Massive capital.
How do you convince a global infrastructure investor sitting in a boardroom in London or New York to finance a new housing development or a massive solar farm in a geographic zone that was a literal active minefield 6 months ago? They won't just take a politician's word for it.
No, they certainly won't.
You need ironclad, legally binding proof that the land is safe. And amazingly, Jeremiah had the exact same problem with his public witnesses in 587 BC.
Let's look at the mechanics of the 17 shekels of silver.
This is where ancient legal practices and modern financial compliance protocols align in a truly spectacular way.
It's wild.
Let's look closely at how meticulously Jeremiah executed this real estate purchase. He didn't just shake Hanamel's hand in the courtyard, make a verbal promise before God, and promise to pay him after the Babylonians left. The Hebrew text explicitly says he exactingly weighed out 17 shekels of silver.
Like, very deliberately.
Yes. The specific verb used is wa'eshkala, which emphasizes the precise physical measurement of the metal on a balanced scale in front of witnesses.
So no debased currency, no funny math, no taking advantage of a desperate cousin, absolute financial integrity.
Yes. He was strictly enforcing the 8th commandment against theft and fraud. He was establishing a righteous economic baseline. But the documentation of the sale is even more remarkable than the weighing of the silver. Oh, this is the best part.
Jeremiah drafted 2 distinct physical legal documents.
The ancient dual deed system. I was absolutely blown away by this section of the source material. Explain how this worked mechanically.
So Jeremiah created the Sefer HaMishnah, the deed of purchase, but it consisted of 2 parts. First, he created the Hechethim, which translates to the sealed deed.
Okay. The sealed deed.
The terms of the contract were written out on a papyrus scroll. That scroll was then rolled up tightly, tied with string, and sealed with wet clay. The witnesses then pressed their personal signet rings into the clay. This sealed document was put away in an archive specifically to prevent any future tampering, alteration, or forgery.
So if there was a bitter property lawsuit 10 or 20 years down the line, the judges would pull this document out, break the clay seals in front of the court, and read the original, unaltered terms.
Exactly. It was the ultimate legal fallback. But alongside that sealed deed, Jeremiah created the Hagalui, the open deed.
The open deed.
This was an exact, unsealed duplicate of the contract that was available for everyday public inspection, civil reference, and taxation purposes. Anyone in the community could read it. And our theological commentators point out that massive archaeological finds, specifically the papyri discovered at Elephantine in Egypt, completely corroborating that this dual deed system is exactly how high-level real estate and legal contracts were transacted in the ancient Near East.
I have to say, when I read about the sealed and open deeds, my mind immediately went to modern computer science.
Really? How so?
The ancient dual deed system is basically a 6th century BC version of a digital blockchain. Think about it. You have the public ledger that anyone in the world can freely inspect to verify a transaction that is your open deed, the Hagalui.
Right.
And then you have the cryptographically secure, tamper-proof original hash that cannot be altered without breaking the entire chain that is your sealed deed, the Hechetham. It is the exact same mechanism of trust, just using papyrus and clay instead of servers and code.
Wow, that is a phenomenal analogy.
It proves that transparency isn't just some modern corporate ESG buzzword cooked up in a boardroom. It is a literal biblical requirement for creating public trust and attracting capital.
And it maps flawlessly onto the economic policy demands for modern Ukraine. To attract the estimated 40% of private financing that will be required for national reconstruction, Ukraine has to create what the policy planners call an investable site protocol.
A modern dual deed for the institutional investor.
Precisely. A major investor needs access to a digital data room. This data room functions as the modern Hagalui, the open deed. It must clearly show the unencumbered legal title, the exact technical mine action survey status, and the legally verifiable clearance certificates signed by accredited operators.
Because without that radically transparent, easily accessible data, the financial risk cannot be mathematically priced by an underwriter, and therefore the capital will not flow. Because an institutional investor can deal with risk, right? They price risk for a living. They invest in volatile markets all the time. But they cannot and will not deal with blind, unquantifiable uncertainty.
Exactly. The financial papers point out a critical distinction. Investors distinguish between risks they can price and risks they cannot verify. A transparent, digitally verifiable land release system turns hazardous, uninsurable uncertainty into a documented, manageable risk.
And once it's manageable.
And when you achieve that level of transparency, you can suddenly utilize massive financial instruments to further de-risk the investment.
Like what? The policy paper threw out a bunch of acronyms here. How do these instruments actually work mechanically?
Let's look at two major ones. The European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the EBRD, has established a €110 million Ukraine Recovery and Reconstruction Guarantee Facility. There is also MEGA, the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, which is an arm of the World Bank that provides political risk insurance.
So it's basically war insurance.
Yet how it works is this. If a foreign company wants to build a factory, MEGA will insure them against the risk of the factory being expropriated by the government or damaged by a future act of war.
But there's a catch, right?
Oh, a massive catch. And this is why the data room is so vital. Those massive insurers will absolutely not underwrite a project if the land itself is a mystery. They need to insure against future war risks, not pre-existing, unresolved explosive contamination. A verified, digitally certified safe site combined with that insured capital is what makes a multi-million-dollar project bankable.
But none of this machinery, not the EBRD, not MEGA, not the data rooms, works without absolute moral and legal integrity at the ground level. If an underwriter in London suspects for 1 second that the demining clearance certificate was acquired because a local official was bribed, the entire house of cards collapses.
Completely.
The capital flight would be instantaneous.
Which brings us back to the absolute necessity of strict anti-corruption measures. The economic paper insists that this cannot just be an honor system. It requires competitive procurement via that Prosoro system, random third-party audits of cleared land, satellite monitoring of agricultural activity, and robust whistleblower protections.
You have to have baseline integrity.
Without baseline moral integrity, economic recovery collapses. And Jeremiah understood this deeply. He knew that the nation of Judah was being sent into exile partly because of systemic legal corruption, extortion, and the perversion of justice in the courts.
So he was setting a new standard.
But being so meticulous with his weights and his deeds, he was prophetically modeling the exact moral integrity that would be required for their future return.
Okay, so you have the perfect legal deed, you have the transparent data room, you have the anti-corruption protocols, but transparency is only half the battle. If you are buying a field in the middle of a war, or beginning a reconstruction process that is realistically going to last for several decades, how do you ensure that these meticulous records and the claim to the land itself survive the ravages of time, shifting political winds, and ongoing conflict?
That is the big question.
This brings us to what is easily my favorite visual from this entire deep dive, the earthenware jars.
Oh, this is great. In Jeremiah 32.5, the prophet commands his scribe, Baruch, to take both the sealed and the open deeds, the complete legal record of the redemption, and place them in a Kelly shares an earthenware vessel or ceramic storage jar.
Why a clay jar? If this is the most important legal document of his life, why not put it in a heavy wooden chest or a reinforced iron safe?
Because Jeremiah was thinking in terms of generations, not years. Iron rusts and corrodes in the damp soil. Wood rots and is eaten by insects. But fired clay, it's inorganic and highly durable. It is virtually impervious to water, insects, and soil erosion. It was the perfect, most resilient archival technology available in the ancient world. And we know this preservation method works flawlessly because, as the historical sources point out, the Dead Sea Scrolls were preserved for over 2 millennia in exactly these kinds of earthenware jars in the caves of Qumran.
That is just incredible. The foresight is amazing. So he is actively planning for the long haul.
Yes, Jeremiah states the purpose of the jars explicitly in the text, so that they may last for many days. He knew the prophetic timeline. He knew that the Babylonian exile was going to last 70 years.
He wasn't going to live to see it.
No, he knew with absolute certainty that he would never personally walk on that field, let alone harvest wheat from it, in his natural lifetime. He was engaging in radical capital preservation and strategic planning for the next generation of Israelites.
So how does that ancient focus on generational preservation translate to the modern economic policy of demining Ukraine today? Because politicians don't usually think in terms of 70 years.
No, they think in 4-year cycles. But it means that the international community has to actively reject short-term political opportunism. They must recognize that demining a country the size of France requires a long-term, highly resilient institutional architecture. It is not a quick fix for the evening news.
It takes time.
By 2026, the policy papers noted that Ukraine had rapidly scaled up to over 100 certified demining operators. But to sustain that massive workforce, they need predictable, multi-year funding pipelines. They cannot rely on 6-month emergency grants.
They need stability.
They need standardized, highly portable training programs, especially to integrate returning military veterans into the demining workforce safely. And they need a unified, digitally secure national data system that will outlast any single political administration or change in parliamentary power.
But we live in a global culture that fundamentally demands instant gratification. If I'm an international donor or a prime minister signing a massive foreign aid check, I want to see a cleared field, a smiling farmer, and a ribbon-cutting ceremony next month, right before my next election cycle.
Of course you do.
How do we practically shift the global geopolitical mindset to this earthenware jar level of patience, especially when there is an entire industry hyping up new technology as a magic bullet?
That technological hype is a massive hazard. And our economic policy source offers a very strong warning against what it terms tech utopianism. There is a massive temptation among Western donors to believe that if we just throw enough Silicon Valley innovation at the problem.
Just buy more tech.
Exactly. If we deploy enough AI algorithms, enough remote sensing drones, and enough massive mechanical flail, we can clean up the entire country in 3 years flat.
Right. The mindset is just let the robots do it. We have the tech. Why doesn't that work?
Because the physics of a war zone do not cooperate with a sales pitch. Mechanical flails are great for flat dirt, but they break down constantly and miss deeply buried ordnance. Drones with thermal cameras are highly effective, but they cannot see through dense summer vegetation, and they cannot penetrate collapsed concrete rubble in urban areas.
Oh, that makes sense.
And AI algorithms are useful for prioritizing satellite data, but AI hallucinates, and it cannot safely identify a novel, improvised, explosive device buried in varied soil types. Ultimately, algorithms prioritize. They do not clear. You still need highly trained human beings on their hands and knees with metal prodders, risking their lives inch by inch.
Wow.
Overpromising technological miracles creates donor fatigue when the miracles don't materialize, and it encourages operators to take unsafe shortcuts. To shift this mindset, the policy source proposes the creation of a recovery compact.
What does a recovery compact look like in practice? How does it enforce patience?
It is a fundamental shift in metrics. It means donors and international partners must legally commit to multi-year predictable funding cycles. But more importantly, they must stop evaluating success merely by how many square hectares were cleared this week.
What do they look at instead?
They must start measuring success by the ultimate long-term return of capital, the economic value of the crops restored to the global market, and the stabilization of civil society. It is an understanding that institutional credibility, much like the preservation of those papyrus deeds in the clay jar, is built over decades of steady, honest work, not days of flashy headlines.
It is a decades-long commitment to preserving sovereign title over the land. It's about patient endurance in the face of overwhelming odds. But as we step back and look at all of this, the staggering geography of the war, the crippling contamination tax, the ancient dual deeds, the radical patience required by the clay jars ultimately, this painstaking, dangerous physical work of redeeming the land points us to a much greater overarching spiritual reality, doesn't it?
It really does.
We need to bring this home by looking at the theological fulfillment of this entire narrative. Let's talk about the ultimate goal.
This is the crux of the matter.
Yeah.
If we read Jeremiah 32 purely as an ancient lesson in real estate law or anti-corruption compliance, we entirely miss the profound Christological fulfillment at its core. Within Reformed theology, Jeremiah stands as a powerful prophetic type of Christ. Think of the intense parallels here. Jeremiah was completely innocent of the charges against him, yet he was imprisoned by his own people. He was rejected by the political and religious establishment.
He suffered for telling the truth.
He sat in the darkness and confinement of the guard's courtyard, while the wrath of judgment loomed over the city. Yet in that exact state of confinement and apparent defeat, he willingly paid the full legal price to redeem an alienated, enemy-occupied field.
He paid the ransom to secure the inheritance when every single rational observer thought it was a lost cause.
Yes, and in infinitely greater glory, the New Testament presents Jesus Christ as the ultimate kinsman redeemer, the supreme Goel. In the theological framework, mankind, serving as the federal head of creation, had forfeited the earth to the tyranny of sin, death, and the demonic realm.
The ultimate contamination tax.
Exactly. Creation itself was groaning, contaminated by the spiritual landmines of human transgression and rebellion. The inheritance was lost. But Christ possessed the legal right as the Son of Man, the absolute purity, and the infinite capital required to redeem it entirely.
But his purchase price wasn't 17 shekels of silver weighed out on a scale.
No. As the Apostle Peter declares in 1 Peter 1:18-19, we were ransomed not with perishable things such as silver or gold, but with the precious blood of Christ, like that of a lamb without blemish or spot.
Right.
Christ executed the supreme, binding transaction of redemptive history on the cross, definitively purchasing the field of the world out from under the dominion of the enemy.
And the theological commentary we are looking at draws this incredibly beautiful connection between the physical, gritty clearing of explosives and the spiritual reality of the resurrection.
There is a profound parallel. Just as a demining team meticulously sweeps a literal mud-soaked battlefield to remove hidden explosives so that human families can safely return and flourish, Christ's death and resurrection decisively disarmed the spiritual rulers and authorities.
Yeah.
As Colossians 2:15 says, he put them to open shame, triumphing over them. He completely neutralized the deadly hidden power of sin and death. Therefore, the painstaking physical clearing of landmines in Ukraine today is not just a secular economic necessity. It is a beautiful, earthly echo of the great eschatological promise.
That's amazing.
It points forward to the day when Christ will purge the entire earth of the machinery of war, beating swords into plowshares and restoring the created order to its full, uncorrupted glory.
That perspective completely transforms how we view the people doing this work on the ground, doesn't it? It elevates the brutal, terrifying work of demining from a grim, technical chore to a sacred covenantal duty. The men and women out there in the freezing mud, carefully probing the dirt for anti-tank mines, operating the flails, mapping the hazards. They aren't just explosive ordnance disposal technicians trying to earn a paycheck.
No, they're not.
Through this theological lens, they are actively participating in the physical manifestation of restoring God's creation. They are pushing back the chaos.
It is the ultimate expression of the creation mandate in action, is bringing order, safety, and life-giving fruitfulness back to a world that has been deeply scarred and alienated by human depravity.
So what does this all mean for us? Let's recap this incredible journey we've been on. We started by looking at a modern nightmare, the $588 billion contamination tax paralyzing modern Ukraine, where hidden explosives have turned the world's breadbasket into a lethal trap, freezing an entire nation's economy.
Right.
And we found the exact blueprint for overcoming that freeze in a prison courtyard in Jerusalem in 587 BC, where a prophet weighed out 17 shekels of silver for a field utterly overrun by his enemies.
The underlying principles of restoration are identical across the millennia. Whether you're dealing with ancient Judah or modern Ukraine, true physical and economic restoration demands absolute legal and moral integrity. It demands radically transparent documentation. It requires the long-term generational patience represented by those earthenware jars, and above all, it requires an unshakable, active trust in God's sovereign providence to resurrect civil society from the ashes of total ruin.
It is just phenomenal how these two vastly different sources,
Yeah.
a secular economic white paper and a biblical prophetic text, speak so perfectly to each other about the nature of redemption. But I want to leave you, our listener, with a final provocative thought. We've spent an hour talking extensively about literal landmines. We've talked about the incredibly fertile Chernozem of Ukraine and the occupied fields of Anathoth. But I want you to think about your own sphere of influence today. Think about your community, your industry, your local church, or even your own extended family. Where are the hidden generational explosives of brokenness, systemic corruption, or unresolved trauma that everyone in your circle is simply stepping around? We all have those zones in our lives or our institutions where we've collectively decided, you know what? It's too dangerous to go there. The conflict isn't worth it. Let's just leave that area idle and work around it.
It is the contamination tax of the soul,
Yeah,
paralyzing the community.
exactly. The contamination tax of our own lives, freezing our ability to flourish. What would it actually look like for you to act as a modern-day Jeremiah in those specific spaces? What would it look like for you to invest your relational capital, your time, your extreme patience, or your professional reputation into redeeming a field that the rest of the world has looked at, calculated the risk, and given up for dead?
It's a huge calling.
Remember that opening image we started with? The besieged city, the starvation, the terrible, irrational investment. Sometimes stepping directly into the mess, facing the hazards, and willingly paying the heavy price for redemption is the most prophetic, God-honoring thing you can possibly do.
Amen to that.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive on reformed thinking. We hope this conversation has profoundly challenged you and given you a robust new framework for looking at global geopolitics, economic policy, and your own calling. Remember that even in the darkest, most fatalistic sieges of history, God is always at work, redeeming the fields of this world one plot at a time. Keep thinking critically, keep exploring, and we will see you on the next deep dive.